everybody. As you're aware, this year's youth camp theme is all about perspective. Today, I'm going to talk to you about how God can make a lot out of a little. I'm going to start with a story, share some thoughts, give some biblical examples, and then leave you with a simple formula on how God can make you great. But first, the story. When I was about your age, I remember a friend of mine telling me once, Chris, you think you can control every aspect of your life. You just can't. And I remember thinking to myself when my friend said that, you are so wrong. I really believed that I could control the outcome of my life if I would just think things through very logically. I liked feeling as though I could control things. It wasn't but a short time later, it seemed like, I thought I had found the girl of my dreams. I thought she was the one that I was going to marry and live happily ever after until we broke up. I still remember how upset and hurt I was, and I didn't understand. I definitely was not in control. What did I do? I went out into a field. I yelled and I screamed and I cried and I blamed God. I yelled and screamed at God. It was all his fault. My perspective then versus now is so much different. And I am so thankful that God allowed me to have the wife I have today. She's awesome. I wonder though, back then having a girlfriend was a big thing to me. It defined me. However, the thought never crossed my mind that I should pray about who my girlfriend should be. I mean, while it was big to me, I just did not think having a girlfriend was anything worthy of taking to God up front. No one had told me any different. I also remember thinking at times when I was younger, only the popular ones get to do that. Or, my parents would have to be rich for me to be able to do that. It's not fair. I'm here to tell you, there is nothing too great or too small to include God in. Have you ever just felt overwhelmed? Have you ever felt inadequate, unsure, afraid? Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you try, things are just out of control? I know I have, especially given the chaos that we are currently experiencing. The church is different. School is different. People seem to be so judgmental. Politics are extreme. I know how frustrating it is for you to have to deal with all the changes going on in your lives and in the world around you right now. But know that God can use all of this for good. Have you ever said or heard someone say, I'm not a very good singer. I could never join the choir or sing a special. Or how about this one? I know you've heard, or at least might have said this one even. You have to be friends with the coach or you won't get to play. Well, how about these thoughts? Have any of these thoughts ever crossed your mind? It's just a small thing. Why should I testify or give God praise in church? For example, have you ever lost something like a ball, a phone, your wallet or purse that had money in it, or something else, and then prayed for it and then found it shortly after? Then you're sitting in services and that thought crosses your mind. I should testify. And then immediately behind that, it's just so small. It wouldn't be worthy of mentioning. Someone might think my testimony is stupid. You took it to God, didn't you? And he answered. God is worthy of all the praise and all the thanksgiving. Each answered prayer adds to your spiritual foundation. Share that story. I guarantee that someone will get encouragement from your testimony. I guarantee it. Now, what about these thoughts? If only I had more. Like, if only I had a little bit more money, I'd tithe this week. or I'd give some money to someone I know that is in need. If only I had more time, I would pray, or I would call my grandparents if you have them, and you're really blessed if you have them. Or that other youth boy or other youth girl or that other person I may not know so well, just to see how they're doing. After all, I haven't seen them in Sunday school or church for a while. Or what about this? If only I had more time or money, I would take donuts or some of my favorite snacks to someone that may have just lost a loved one or is going through a hard time or just on my mind, or may have taught a lesson for you at youth camp. How about these thoughts? It's just not possible. It's just not possible. That person is just so evil. God would never save them. Never. What about this? It's just not possible. I can never teach or preach a lesson at church. I'm not old enough, or I'm not a good enough speaker, or I don't know enough to do that. It's just not possible. It's just not possible. I don't know. I know God doesn't want me to do this, but everyone else is. Another thought. It's just not possible. I do not have the talent or the means to do something meaningful for the Lord. 10 years ago, my dad passed away right before youth camp. It was hard losing him. You know what? My whole family decided we'd go to youth camp immediately after that. Why? Even though we were hurting, we remembered how encouraged and how refreshed and how energized and how uplifted we'd feel when we got together at youth camp. The Spirit of God, the testimonies, the songs, the praise from youth was so awesome. Remember, with God, all things are possible. And please remember, your passion and energy for God as a youth is inspiring to us older folks, to your peers, and even to the younger ones that look up to you. I do want to remind you, in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16 through 17, Paul writes that all Scripture is given by inspiration of God for instruction so that we can be thoroughly equipped. So let's consider a few biblical examples since he's said that. One great example that I can think about in the New Testament that comes to my mind is where Jesus prayed over just 5 loaves and 2 fish, right? 5 loaves and 2 fish. His disciples broke the loaves up. They passed these loaves out to 5,000 hungry people. They ate it. They were full. And they had leftovers. You know what? Also, the Old Testament has many great examples where God used something small and turned it into something great. Here's a few examples that come to mind. In Judges chapter 6 and chapter 7, God took a poor, young, fearful Gideon, gave him courage, surrounded him with an army of about 32,000 men at his disposal, and then said, you know what? This is just too many. So he instructed Gideon to reduce the number. And then reduce the number again, all the way down until it was about 300 men. Now you say, okay, 300 men's a lot. But in Judges chapter 7, verse 12, it actually talks about how the number of the enemy was innumerable. It was vast. But you know what? God didn't even stop there. Those 300 men that God selected defeated the enemy and saved Israel, all without ever lifting a sword. God won the battle. Another example is in 1 Kings chapter 3. Solomon could have asked for anything, but he asked God for discernment between good and evil. God granted that and so much more. He asked for something small, and God gave him so much. He's actually known as the wisest man in the world. He had so much wisdom. And then in 1 Samuel chapter 17, little David, he goes, he's so small, he takes a small, everyday common stone from a stream, places it in a sling. So both he's small, the stone's small, but with God, he slew a mighty warrior giant. How about Numbers 13? All but 2 of the Israelite spies that went out and spied the land of Canaan, they saw themselves as little grasshoppers compared to the giants in the land. This perspective, this perspective was that they would be squashed. But when God went into the battle with the children of Israel, when they finally were able to cross over the Jordan and go to battle, the battle was never lost when God was in it. You know, another one, 1 Samuel in chapter 16, when selecting a new king for Israel, Samuel, the prophet of God, he thought that appearance and physical stature were what made a good king, but God told him, man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks at their heart. God took the small, humble shepherd boy and made him a very, very great king. Another story, 2 Kings chapter 4. It's a story of an impoverished widow woman with no way to provide for her family. Her sons were actually going to be enslaved because of her debt. What's she do? She goes to the man of God, Elijah, and he tells her, take her almost empty jar of oil, along with all her other jars, and go borrow other jars. And she pours the oil that she has, and she pours the oil that she has, and she pours the oil that she has. You know what? She had an abundant supply. God took something small and made it very abundant. So there's many other examples in the Bible. And when you read these stories, they seem to be so simple. It's not about whether you're the strongest, whether you're the smartest, whether you're the most talented, whether you're the wealthiest. It's not about whether you are an amazing speaker or singer. It's not about whether you have a lot of friends. And it's definitely not about whether you have a lot of likes or followers on social media. It is about whether you have a close relationship with the maker of this universe. Even with God in your life, you're going to have times where you feel inadequate. You're going to feel insecure. You're going to feel afraid. You're going to feel poor. You're going to feel lonely. And that's okay. You've got to remember that you are just as important as any of those Bible characters' stories that I just mentioned and some that you've read about as well. In the grand scheme of our lives are small. The Bible says they're but a vapor, a very small, little tiny vapor. So, Brother Chris, what's your point? You've given me a few examples of where I might feel small. You've told me that God can make a lot out of a little. You've given me a few Bible examples where God did make a lot out of a little. But how can I have a life of biblical proportion? How can I make the most out of my small vapor of life? Before I answer that, can I ask you, am I the only one that finds myself munching on something during online services or virtual presentations? Crazy as it may sound, since I'm thinking about food and now some of you are too, I'm going to leave you with this acronym so that you might remember how you can be great with God. The acronym is CHOW. 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 Communication, humility, obedience, and willingness. Let's talk about communication. Communicate with God. Pray. You don't have to have these long repetitive prayers. Just like Adam and Eve walked with God during the cool of the day, you need to try to talk with God. Share your deepest feelings with Him. Ask Him for His thoughts and His direction. You know what? I think it's good to strive to do it in the cool of the day. They did it in the morning and the evening. Stay humble. Humble would be the next one. In my experience, fasting or doing without something with the sole intent of drawing close to God is the best way to stay humble. Remember in 1 Samuel 15, King Saul had just disobeyed God, and Samuel reminded him, when you were small in your eyes, did God not make you king? God was able to use Saul as long as he was obedient, and he didn't think he could do things on his own. When Saul thought more of himself than he should, he tried to do things on his own without God. And that is when he's lost the favor of God. And that brings me to the next one. Be obedient. There are a lot of commandments in the Bible, and you're just going to have to read them. You're going to have to think about them. You need to meditate upon them. It is good to listen to the pastor and your teachers, but don't just let someone else tell you what's in the Bible and what it means. Take some initiative. God gave you a brain and He gave you a spirit for a reason. Please utilize them. And then finally, be willing. Be a willing vessel. Look for opportunities to be a servant of God and to share His love through you. You can communicate with God and He might impress something upon you. But without a willingness to do even the most meaningless or dirty task, how will God be able to make something great out of it? If you can remember communication, humility, obedience, and willingness, then you will be well on your way to biblical greatness. Remember, God prefers making something out of nothing. I love you all, and I pray that God will be with you in all that you do. God bless.